She didn't leave quietly or gently. She made sure every word cut deep, as if she wanted the reason for the divorce to stay carved into my memory forever. To her, love had slowly turned into embarrassment, and marriage had become a mistake she was desperate to erase. She no longer saw a husband in front of her, only a man she believed would never rise above mediocrity. Every argument ended the same way, with money dragged into the conversation like a final verdict. My salary wasn't enough. My dreams were childish. My patience was mistaken for weakness. In her eyes, being poor wasn't just a financial state. It was a character flaw. She compared me to others without shame. Friends' husbands, distant relatives, even strangers she followed online became examples of what a real man should be. Each comparison chipped away at whatever dignity I had left. She didn't scream. She spoke calmly, which somehow made it worse. She explained her decision as if she were doing us both a favor, as if leaving me was an act of logic rather than betrayal. Love, she said, couldn't survive without comfort, and she was tired of struggling. The word struggle felt unfair. I was working, trying, refusing shortcuts, but effort meant nothing without visible rewards. The day she asked for divorce, there were no tears, just a cold assessment of my worth. She said she didn't want to waste her youth waiting for a future that might never come. According to her, ambition without money was meaningless, and patience was for people with no options. I realized then that she had already left long before the papers were signed. Respect was gone, and once respect disappears, love rarely survives. What hurt most wasn't losing her, it was how easily she erased everything we had shared. Late nights planning, small victories, quiet hopes for something better, all dismissed as fantasies of a man who didn't know his place. She walked away, convinced she was upgrading her life, convinced she was choosing certainty over risk. I stood there feeling reduced to a number on a paycheck, my entire existence summarized by what I couldn't provide at that moment. After she left, the silence in the house was heavy, not peaceful, accusatory. Every empty room echoed her words. "You'll never be more than this." That sentence followed me everywhere. It burned, but it also clarified something brutal and important. I had been loved conditionally, not for who I was, but for what I could offer. When the offer seemed insufficient, the contract was terminated. That rejection changed me. It stripped away illusions and forced me to confront a painful truth about value, perception, and timing. I wasn't abandoned because I lacked character or effort. I was abandoned because my potential hadn't matured yet. She didn't leave because I was incapable. She left because she refused to wait. And in that moment of being judged unworthy, something inside me hardened not with hatred, but with resolve. After the divorce, there was no dramatic announcement, no social media posts about a new beginning, no speeches about proving anyone wrong. Life simply became quieter and heavier at the same time. The days blurred together as I adjusted to being alone, not just emotionally, but practically. Every bill, every responsibility, every decision rested on my shoulders. There was no one left to impress, no one to argue with, and strangely, that emptiness became my starting point. I stopped explaining myself to the world and focused on surviving one day at a time. The struggle wasn't glamorous. It meant long hours at work, followed by longer nights planning, learning, and failing in silence. I took risks that didn't look impressive from the outside: extra shifts, side projects that paid almost nothing at first, weekends spent studying instead of resting. Progress was slow and often invisible. There were months when nothing seemed to change, when effort produced only exhaustion. But unlike before, no one was watching, judging, or doubting me out loud. That absence of noise allowed something important to grow: discipline. I learned to live below my means, not because I had to, but because I wanted control. Every small saving felt like a quiet victory. Every new skill felt like a brick laid into a foundation only I knew existed. There was no applause, no encouragement, and sometimes no hope, just repetition. Wake up, work, learn, repeat. Friends thought I had disappeared. In reality, I had gone underground, rebuilding without an audience. Loneliness became a teacher. Without someone else's expectations shaping my choices, I started to understand my own strengths and weaknesses clearly. I confronted habits I had ignored before: procrastination, self-doubt, the comfort of excuses. When things went wrong, there was no one else to blame. That accountability hurt, but it also empowered me. Failure stopped feeling like humiliation and started feeling like data, information I could use to adjust and improve. There were moments when her voice echoed in my head, reminding me of everything she thought I could never become. Instead of fighting those thoughts, I used them as fuel, not in a loud, angry way, but in a controlled, almost cold determination. I didn't want revenge, I wanted freedom. Freedom from being defined by someone else's timeline, expectations, or approval. Success, I realized, didn't need witnesses to be real. Years passed like this quietly, steadily. What looked like stagnation from the outside was actually transformation in progress. My confidence didn't come from money at first, but from consistency. I kept showing up when no one cared. I kept improving when no one noticed. That consistency changed how I carried myself, how I spoke, how I thought. I stopped seeing myself as the man who had been left and started seeing myself as someone under construction. By the time results finally became visible, they felt almost secondary. The real change had already happened long before anyone else could see it. The silence, the struggle, and the patience had reshaped me into someone who no longer needed validation, only momentum. Time became the one thing that could not be rushed, no matter how badly I wanted proof that my effort was worth something. In the beginning, 6 years felt impossibly long, almost cruel. I measured progress in weeks and months, expecting visible change to arrive quickly, as if hard work should immediately announce itself. But reality refused to cooperate. Growth did not come in dramatic leaps. It arrived quietly, stretched thin across seasons of repetition and waiting. The calendar kept moving even when it felt like I was standing still. The first year was mostly about stabilization. I wasn't rising yet. I was learning how not to fall apart. I paid off small debts, repaired mistakes I had ignored, and built routines that didn't depend on motivation. Some days felt productive, many felt pointless. From the outside, nothing about my life looked impressive. There were no signs of a comeback, no visible glow-up. If anyone had checked in on me then, they would have assumed my ex had been right. That assumption stung, but it also forced me to detach my sense of worth from immediate outcomes. As the years passed, something subtle shifted. My skills deepened, my decisions became calmer and more deliberate. I stopped chasing quick wins and started thinking in longer horizons. Opportunities didn't explode into my life, they accumulated. One connection led to another. One small success made the next one slightly easier. The compound effect was slow but relentless, like interest growing on an account no one else could see. Time, once my enemy, was slowly turning into an ally. There were moments of doubt scattered throughout those years. Late nights when exhaustion made me question whether patience was just another word for denial. I watched others seem to leap ahead, posting milestones and celebrations while my own progress remained largely invisible. Comparison threatened to undo me more than failure ever did, but I learned to step back and remind myself that most success stories look sudden only in hindsight. In real time, they are messy, uneven, and filled with long stretches of nothing happening. By the fourth and fifth year, the results began to align. My income stabilized, then grew. More importantly, my confidence was no longer borrowed from hope. It was built on evidence. I trusted my ability to adapt, to recover, to keep going even when momentum slowed. I no longer felt rushed to prove anything to anyone. The desperation that once fueled me faded, replaced by a quiet assurance that I was on a path with depth, not just speed. When the sixth year arrived, it didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like a checkpoint. Looking back, the time gap was no longer a symbol of delay, but of legitimacy. Nothing about my progress was accidental or inflated. Every step had been earned under pressure, without shortcuts. That length of time filtered out illusion and ego, leaving something solid in its place. The years did more than change my circumstances. They rewired my understanding of success. I learned that real growth demands patience not as a virtue, but as a requirement. Anything built too fast can disappear just as quickly. What took time had roots, and those roots made all the difference when the world finally started to notice. The moment everything shifted didn't happen in a dramatic confrontation or a carefully planned reveal. It happened quietly, almost accidentally, in a public space where neither of us expected our lives to intersect again. I had just finished a meeting and stepped outside, the weight of routine still on my shoulders, when the low, unmistakable presence of the car behind me changed the atmosphere. The Rolls-Royce wasn't loud or flashy, but it commanded attention in a way that didn't ask for permission. People noticed, heads turned, conversations paused, and for the first time in years, I was on the other side of that silent judgment. When I saw her standing there, recognition passed over her face in stages: confusion first, then disbelief, and finally something closer to shock. She looked at me, then at the car, and then back at me again, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The symbol spoke for itself. It wasn't just about money or luxury. It was about certainty, about arrival, about a life that no longer needed explanations. In that instant, the balance of power shifted without a single word being exchanged. Years ago, she had spoken from a position of certainty, convinced she was making the smart choice by walking away. Now that certainty belonged to me. I could see it in her posture, the way her confidence faltered, the way questions formed before she even opened her mouth. The assumptions she once made about my future collapsed under the weight of reality. The man she believed would never rise had done so in the most undeniable way possible. What made the moment powerful wasn't arrogance or revenge. It was restraint. I didn't boast. I didn't explain my journey or list my achievements. I simply existed as proof that her judgment had been incomplete. That quiet presence was more unsettling than any speech could have been. Success, displayed without desperation, has a way of rewriting history in people's minds. Suddenly, the past isn't as clear as they once believed it was. Around us, life continued. Strangers admired the car, unaware of the deeper story unfolding beside it. For her, that public setting amplified everything. This wasn't a private apology or a controlled conversation. It was a visible reversal. The respect she had once withdrawn was now unavoidable, reflected not just in the car, but in the way I carried myself. Calm, unrushed, unbothered. I wasn't trying to be seen, yet I couldn't be ignored. That encounter marked more than a change in perception. It marked a closing of a chapter. I realized I no longer needed acknowledgement from her to validate what I had built. The power shift wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about realizing I had outgrown the need to be right. When success becomes internal first and external second, it alters every interaction. As I drove away, I understood that some victories don't require confrontation. They announce themselves naturally through presence, timing, and the quiet authority of a life well built. The world had recalibrated its view of me, and in that recalibration, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt finality. She reached out a few days later, not directly at first, but through cautious, indirect messages that pretended to be casual. A question about how I had been, a comment about coincidence and fate. Each word felt carefully chosen, as if she were testing the ground before stepping fully into unfamiliar territory. The confidence that once defined her tone was gone, replaced by hesitation and a strange politeness. I could sense the internal conflict behind every line, pride wrestling with regret, memory colliding with reality. When we finally spoke face to face, the reversal was undeniable. She listened more than she talked. She asked questions she would never have asked before. There was an attentiveness in her eyes that hadn't existed during our marriage, a quiet urgency that revealed how much the situation had unsettled her. She admitted she had been wrong about me, about my future, about what mattered. The words came slowly, as if saying them out loud required dismantling the story she had told herself for years. She spoke about loneliness, about relationships that looked promising but never felt stable, about the realization that comfort without depth eventually feels empty. My success had forced her to confront choices she once justified so easily. Seeing what I had become didn't just surprise her. It challenged the narrative that leaving me had been the smartest decision of her life. Regret, when it finally arrives, rarely announces itself loudly. It lingers in pauses, in lowered voices, in eyes that avoid direct contact. Then came the question I had expected but never anticipated how it would feel to hear. She asked if there was a chance, if we could start again, wiser, more mature, different people. It wasn't desperation, but it was vulnerability, and that made it complicated. For a moment, the past tried to resurface. Shared memories, unfinished emotions, the familiarity of someone who once knew me deeply. But alongside that nostalgia was clarity. I realized how much had changed not just externally, but internally. The man sitting across from her was no longer seeking validation or fearing abandonment. I had built a life anchored in self-respect, not approval. Her interest, once withheld, now felt conditional in a way I could finally recognize. It wasn't malicious, but it was reactive, drawn to the certainty I now represented rather than the uncertainty she had once rejected. Saying no wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of alignment. I wished her well genuinely, but I didn't reopen a door that had closed for a reason. Growth sometimes means recognizing that certain chapters belong exactly where they ended. She had made her choice when my future was unclear. I had made mine when my present became solid. As we parted, there was no bitterness, only acceptance. Role reversal had done its work, not to punish, but to reveal. I understood then that the real victory wasn't making her regret leaving. It was becoming someone who no longer needed her to stay.